London is wrapped in fog, and where others see chaos, he finds the truth. The legendary detective Sherlock Holmes is back in the game. Welcome to the channel. Put on your headphones and unravel new mysteries alongside him. It was upon a blustery evening in early March that I first perceived the faint stirrings of the case that was to become known in the chronicles of my old friend Sherlock Holmes as The Room Without an Owner. Though the affair began with circumstances so slight as to seem unworthy of note, it was destined to assume a form so curious and so sinister that even the singular intellect of Holmes found itself tested to its utmost powers. At the time, Holmes had been absent from Baker Street for nearly a fortnight, having gone northward to investigate some obscure forgery in the offices of a Yorkshire solicitor. Left alone in our familiar lodgings, I had resumed a measure of medical practice and was, I confess, rather dull in spirit. It was during one of those dreary evenings, as the wind drove the rain against the panes and the gaslight flickered upon the littered armchairs, that I received a most unexpected communication. The envelope bore no official crest, merely the familiar hand of Mrs. Hudson, our long-suffering landlady. Within was a short note, written in evident agitation. "My dear Dr. Watson, I beg you to call at once. There is something very strange across the street, and I dare not speak of it to the constable. It concerns the house at number 14, Upper Montague Street. Pray come without delay. Yours anxiously, Monsieur Hudson." I wasted no time in responding. Within 10 minutes, I had crossed Baker Street, my hat pulled low against the drizzle. Mrs. Hudson met me in the passage, wringing her hands and glancing nervously toward the window that overlooked the opposite side. "Oh, Dr. Watson," she whispered. "It's a queer thing, sir. Very queer indeed. That house across the way, no, 14, there's something not right about it. I've seen lights there at odd hours when there's no one supposed to be living in it at all. I peered out into the wet, misty night. The street lamps made blurred halos through the rain. Opposite, the house in question loomed in dull silhouette. An ordinary lodging house of 3 stories, with drawn curtains and a single faint glimmer showing through the upper front window. "Are you certain the place is empty?" I asked. "As sure as can be," she replied. "The last tenants left before Christmas, and the landlord told me he hadn't let it since. Yet I've seen shadows move behind the curtains, and once, just once, I could have sworn I saw the glint of a man's face at the glass." I reassured the good woman as best I could, but her unease communicated itself to me. There was something undeniably odd in her account, and the solitary, watchful light in that deserted house seemed to deepen the mystery. Holmes would have known at once whether this was mere fancy or a matter deserving scrutiny. But Holmes was away. I promised Mrs. Hudson that I would make discreet inquiries in the morning and perhaps speak to the local constable. That night, however, I could not resist the impulse to watch a little on my own account. After returning to my room, I drew my chair to the window, extinguished the lamp, and waited. The rain lessened, and the street fell silent, save for the occasional rattle of a passing cab. The light in number 14 burned steadily, a yellow eye peering across the void. Midnight struck from St. George's Church. As the final chime faded, the light flickered once, then went out. I waited another quarter of an hour. All was still. At length I retired, telling myself that I was foolish to imagine mystery in so commonplace a circumstance. Yet, as I drifted into uneasy slumber, an image lingered in my mind. A dim room, drawn curtains, and the sense of some unseen watcher gazing out into the rain-soaked street. When Holmes returned 2 days later, he found me at breakfast, the newspaper neglected, and Mrs. Hudson's note lying open beside my plate. His keen eyes fell at once upon it. "Ah, a summons of distress," said he, hanging up his coat. "And from our good Mrs. Hudson, no less. I trust, Watson, you have not been playing at amateur detective in my absence." I explained briefly what I had observed, expecting him to dismiss it as trivial. Instead, he grew attentive. "Lights in an untenanted house," he mused. "Curtains always drawn. No trace of the supposed tenant. Curious indeed." He crossed to the window and stood there for several minutes, his lean figure outlined against the morning light. "Watson, my dear fellow," he said at last, "if we can believe Mrs. Hudson's report, and I see no reason to doubt it, then there is a mystery to which our very doorstep offers the key. The world, it seems, is determined not to let us rest." That evening found us again at our window, the gas lowered, the room in shadow. Holmes's grey eyes never left the opposite house. Hour after hour he watched, motionless save for the occasional flick of his cigarette. Shortly after 11, the same dim glow appeared behind the curtains of the upper window. Holmes's expression did not alter, but I saw the gleam of satisfaction in his gaze. "There it is, Watson, the phantom light. The question is, what manner of man tends a lamp in an empty room?" He rose, took his hat and cane, and turned to me with that quiet eagerness which always presaged adventure. "Come, my dear fellow, let us take a short walk to Upper Montague Street. The game, as ever, is afoot." The night air was sharp, the streets slick with the remnants of rain. Holmes strode with that quick, noiseless step which always gave me the impression that he moved faster than mortal men, yet without effort. He said little as we turned the corner into Upper Montague Street. The lamps there burned dimly, the row of houses presenting a line of darkened facades, save for the one at number 14. There, behind drawn curtains, a thin strip of yellow light shone like a watchful eye. Holmes halted a few yards from the gate and examined the building with the intensity of a hawk sighting its prey. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "The curtains are closed from within, yet not quite evenly. The upper right corner droops slightly, a hand unaccustomed to housework perhaps, and the light is steady, though faint. Not gas, but candlelight. The flame wavers only when the window pane catches the draught from the chimney." He moved closer, inspecting the iron railings and the flagstones beneath our feet. His lantern remained unlit, but he bent low, passing his magnifying glass over the ground with practiced care. After a few minutes, he gave a satisfied hum. "There have been recent comings and goings," he said softly. "The mud upon these steps is of yesterday's rain, and yet the impressions are fresh. 2 sets of boots, one heavy and square-toed, the other lighter, with a slight inward turn. A man, and perhaps a woman, or a youth of slight build. The latch is polished by frequent handling, and yet the dust on the knocker remains undisturbed. This, my dear Watson, is a house both entered and concealed." I shivered, though not from cold. The quiet around us seemed to deepen, as though the whole street held its breath. "What do you propose?" I whispered. "We shall make the acquaintance of the interior," he replied. "I fancy that an inspection by moonlight may yield certain particulars unavailable to the daylight inquirer." Holmes produced a slender wire from his pocket, and in less time than it takes to relate, the front door of number 14 swung open with the faintest click. We stepped inside, and he closed it softly behind us. The darkness was profound. Even our footsteps upon the wooden floor seemed sacrilegiously loud. Holmes lit his small shaded lantern, casting a weak yellow circle about us. The entrance hall was impeccably tidy, too tidy. No mud on the mat, no cloak upon the peg, no umbrella by the stand. The air was stale, yet not musty, as though the place were cleaned often but seldom lived in. Holmes's eyes roved ceaselessly, noting every detail: the faint dust upon the banister, the absence of cobwebs, the lack of any personal effects. "Curious," he murmured. "Not deserted, not occupied. A paradox in brick and mortar." We advanced to the sitting room on the ground floor. It was furnished, though sparsely, a small table, 2 chairs, and a cold grate. No pictures adorned the walls, no books lay upon the shelves. On the mantelpiece, however, Holmes's lantern glinted upon a half-burned candle, a small brass key, and a single scrap of paper, no larger than a postage stamp. He took it up delicately with his forceps. "Watson, what do you make of this?" I examined it by the light. It was a torn fragment of thin blue paper, the corner of what might once have been an envelope. Upon it, in neat black ink, were the words, "Jency Office, Whitehall." "A government department," said I. "Precisely," Holmes replied. "And the brass key, clearly new, recently handled, yet without the imprint of any ring or chain. Such a key is made for doors of a uniform sort. Office doors, government perhaps. The clue begins to take shape." He pocketed both items and turned his attention to the window. The curtains were thick, drawn close, yet he allowed one narrow slit of moonlight to pierce the gloom. Through it, the light from Baker Street was visible across the road. "Note, Watson, the position of this chair," said he. "Directly before the window, placed at a slight angle. A man sits here not for comfort, but to watch. And what does he watch, my dear fellow? Why, our own rooms at 221B. A cold prickle ran along my neck. "You think someone has been observing us?" Holmes smiled faintly. "I think it highly probable. Every candle burned in this room has done so under our very gaze, yet not by chance. We have been the subjects of another's scrutiny." He moved to the hearth, where a thin film of ash lay in the grate. With his glass, he studied it minutely. "Charred paper," he said. "Fine texture, official watermark. Something destroyed. Perhaps a message too dangerous to keep. The edges are crisp. It was burned but recently, within the last 12 hours. Someone was here last night, Watson, and they were in haste to leave." As we stood thus, a faint sound reached our ears, the distant creak of a board from the upper floor. Holmes's eyes flashed, and he raised a finger for silence. We both froze. The sound came again, unmistakable this time. A footstep, then another, slow, deliberate. He extinguished the lantern, plunging us into darkness. I could hear the rhythmic beating of my own heart. The steps came closer, descending the staircase. A dim shape appeared in the doorway, tall, thin, and moving with cautious precision. The intruder paused, then advanced a step farther. Holmes sprang like a cat. There was a brief struggle, a cry, and the clatter of something metallic striking the floor. I seized the lantern and relit it. The light revealed Holmes pinning a man against the wall, a gaunt fellow in shabby clothes, his face grey with terror. "What is your business here?" Holmes demanded. The man stammered incoherently. I came for my bag, sir. Only that. I didn't mean no harm. The room's been lent to me, it has. I was told I could stay a night or two." "By whom?" The man's eyes darted fearfully. "I don't know his name, sir. Honest truth. A gentleman, well dressed, said I'd be paid if I kept the fire lit and the curtains drawn. Said no questions were to be asked." Holmes's expression softened only slightly. "And what became of this gentleman?" "He ain't been back these 2 days. I swear it, sir. I was just coming to fetch my things and go." Holmes released him and motioned to the chair. "Sit down. You are either a most unfortunate fool or a most accomplished liar, which we shall shortly discover." As Holmes questioned the trembling intruder, I noticed the object that had fallen during the scuffle. A small black leather bag, half open upon the floor. From within protruded the corner of another envelope, stamped with the crest of the Foreign Office. I caught Holmes's eye. His lips curved in that familiar, dangerous smile that signified the scent of prey. "Watson," he said quietly, "the room without an owner is beginning to speak." Holmes stood over the shabby intruder like a judge above the dock, his keen grey eyes fixed upon every twitch of the man's trembling hands. The fellow, who gave his name as James Mullins, was of that uncertain age and appearance common to London's less fortunate, thin, with hollow cheeks, a ragged collar, and the unmistakable odour of gin about him. Yet beneath the grime there was something watchful and fearful in his manner, as of one accustomed to hiding more than poverty. Holmes questioned him in that low, deliberate tone which could unnerve the stoutest criminal. "You say, Mr. Mullins, that you were engaged to keep this room lit and the curtains drawn. By whom were you employed?" "I've told you, sir. A gentleman. Said his name were... well, I can't rightly recall. He come up to me near the docks 3 weeks ago. Said he needed a man for a bit of quiet work. Paid me fair too, 2 shillings a night." "And what was the nature of this quiet work?" "Just to come here after dusk, light a candle, keep the blinds down, and make sure the place looked lived in. Said he'd send for me when he needed more done." Holmes's gaze did not soften. "Did he ever enter the house himself?" "Once or twice, sir. Always after midnight. Wore a long coat and a scarf over his face. But I could tell by his voice, educated like. Spoke soft but sharp. Said I wasn't to touch nothing, not even the chair by the window. I done what he said. Didn't mean no wrong, sir." Holmes stooped and lifted the small black leather bag from the floor. "And this? I take it you were coming to fetch this when we surprised you?" Mullins nodded miserably. "That's right, sir. Just me own things. A razor, bit of tobacco, and..." But Holmes had already opened the bag. The razor and tobacco were indeed there, but so too was a folded sheet of paper marked with the heading "Confidential, Foreign Office." Holmes spread it upon the table. It contained a list of names, several of which were underlined in red ink. The rest was written in cipher. Watson, ever the man of straightforward action, could not repress an exclamation. "Good heavens, Holmes, this is no ordinary vagrant's property." "Quite so," Holmes murmured. "Mullins, you are either in deeper waters than you understand, or you are a remarkably clumsy conspirator." "I swear, sir," the the man protested. "I don't know nothing about them papers. Never seen 'em before tonight. They wasn't in the bag when I last left it here, that I'll swear before any court." Holmes regarded him steadily, then turned to me. "Watson, our friend speaks truth, or at least partial truth. Observe the stitching of the bag's inner lining. It has been unpicked and re-sewn within the last few days. Someone placed this document there without his knowledge. A useful hiding place, considering the owner's unprepossessing appearance." He faced Mullins again. "You may consider yourself fortunate, sir. Your role in this little drama appears to have been that of an unwitting pawn. Still, you must remain available for questioning. Watson, kindly take down his address, if he has one." "I lodge at the Sailor's Rest, off Tottenham Court Road," Mullins mumbled. Holmes nodded. "Very well. Go home, keep silent, and come to no harm. Should I require you, I shall find you." The man hesitated only a moment, then fled into the night like a creature released from a snare. The door closed behind him, leaving us once more in the strange, lifeless room. For some moments, Holmes said nothing. He stood at the window, fingers steepled, eyes far away in thought. Then, very quietly, he spoke. "Watson, we have stumbled upon something delicate. The presence of this paper, the anonymous employer, and the use of an uninhabited house. These are not the workings of common burglars or blackmailers. We tread, I suspect, on the outer edge of espionage." He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his pocketbook. "I shall take this to my acquaintance at the Foreign Office in the morning. But tonight, we observe." He motioned for the lantern to be extinguished once more, and we waited in darkness. The street outside lay silent, save for the patter of a light drizzle returning. Time passed slowly, marked only by the ticking of my watch and the occasional sigh of wind through the chimney. At length, Holmes touched my arm. "Do you hear that?" I strained my ears. A faint creak came from above, the same sound as before. Someone else was in the house. Holmes moved like a shadow, noiseless on the boards, his revolver drawn. I followed close, every nerve alert. We ascended the staircase step by step until we reached the landing. The sound came from the front bedroom. Holmes pressed his ear to the door. A rustle, the faint scrape of metal, then silence. He turned the handle swiftly and burst in. The room was empty. Only the window stood open, curtains billowing inward. Holmes sprang to it, but we were just in time to see a dark figure drop lightly from the ledge to the street below and vanish into the fog. He leaned out, listening. "Gone," he said grimly, and with him, no doubt, our anonymous employer. He turned back into the room. A single object lay upon the carpet. A glove, fine kid leather, pale grey such as a gentleman might wear. Holmes picked it up, examined the lining, and smiled faintly. "Custom made from a Bond Street shop. Initials HC inside the wrist. The trail, my dear Watson, begins to take form." We searched the rest of the house, but found nothing more. No letters, no personal effects, no hint of food or habitation. Every surface was clean, every drawer empty. It was a dwelling maintained only for appearances, used at intervals, and then abandoned. Back at Baker Street, as dawn tinged the sky with grey, Holmes sat before the fire, his pipe sending curls of smoke into the still air. "You see, Watson," he said, "the ingenuity of the plan. A man rents a vacant room under an assumed name. He pays a vagrant to make it seem occupied. Meanwhile, The true purpose of the place is to serve as a dead drop, a point of exchange for confidential materials, unnoticed because it appears ordinary. But something went wrong. Either the messenger betrayed his master, or the master silenced the messenger. You mean the man who escaped through the window? Precisely. And I intend to discover who he is. A glove, a ciphered document, and a hired shadow. These are the threads. And when we have drawn them together, I suspect we shall find ourselves facing not a thief, but a traitor. He rose, his expression fierce and resolute. Get some rest, Watson. Tomorrow we call upon the Foreign Office and upon Inspector Lestrade. The curtain is only beginning to rise. The following morning dawned pale and uncertain, with a thin fog lying low over the city. I found Holmes already at the breakfast table, dressed and ready for the day, his teacup untouched, and the Times lying open before him. He had evidently been awake for some hours, for the ash upon the mantelpiece betrayed the passage of at least 3 pipes. "Ah, Watson," said he, glancing up as I entered. "I trust you slept soundly after our nocturnal excursion?" "As soundly as one can after seeing a man leap from a second-story window," I replied. Holmes smiled faintly. "Quite so. A healthy sign of professional conscience. Sit down, my dear fellow. There is work to be done." He pushed across the table the glove we had recovered from the house. "Observe it once more, Watson. You will note the initials HC within and the faint scent of Russian leather. A Bond Street make, excellent quality, but worn slightly at the thumb. A man who writes frequently, perhaps? Or one accustomed to handling papers? Combine that with the Foreign Office document and our phantom room, and the outline of a certain sort of gentleman begins to emerge." He rose abruptly and reached for his hat. "Come, Watson. The day will not wait upon us. I have already wired Inspector Lestrade to meet us at Whitehall. If our friend HC is indeed connected with the government, it is best to approach the matter discreetly." We took a cab through the damp morning streets, the clatter of the horses' hooves muffled by the fog. The Foreign Office stood grey and imposing, its great stone pillars gleaming with moisture. At the entrance, Lestrade awaited us, his keen little eyes full of suspicion and curiosity. "Morning, Mr. Holmes," said he. "So you've stumbled upon something that smells of politics, eh? The Yards had word of a Foreign Office clerk gone missing these 2 days past. Henry Carrington by name. Could that be your man?" Holmes gave a satisfied nod. "The initials are suggestive, Inspector. What can you tell us of this Carrington?" Lestrade consulted his notebook. 34 years old, unmarried, respectable family from Kent. Been at the department for nearly a decade. Nothing against him. Steady fellow, though lately, some say, he'd seemed nervous. He was handling confidential dispatches, too. The night before he disappeared, he drew out a packet of documents for review and never returned them. The department's in a flurry over it." "Indeed," murmured Holmes. "And when was he last seen?" "Tuesday evening. He left the office just after 8, telling the porter he was taking papers home. Never came back. His lodgings were searched. No sign of him, nor of the missing documents." Holmes was silent for a moment, his brows drawn together in thought. "I see. Then, Lestrade, we must assume that Mr. Henry Carrington is either dead, fled, or imprisoned, and the ciphered paper found in Mullins's bag was doubtless part of the same correspondence." Lestrade looked grave. "You think it's treason, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes waved his hand impatiently. "Let us not put names to things before we have proof. The matter may be grave, or it may be merely foolish. But I shall know more before nightfall." We were admitted to the Foreign Office under some protest from the clerks, but Holmes's name carried weight even in those official corridors. We were shown into a small, bare room where the Under-Secretary awaited us, a thin, nervous man named Pemberton. He was pale, with quick, darting eyes, and he greeted us with the air of one who had not slept. "My dear Mr. Holmes," he began anxiously, "you have no notion what a storm this has caused. Carrington was a trusted man, most trusted. If it becomes known that he is missing with important documents, there will be questions in Parliament, perhaps even an inquiry. It would be disastrous." Holmes inclined his head politely. "Then I shall endeavour to prevent such embarrassment. Tell me, Mr. Pemberton, what were the contents of these papers?" The Under-Secretary hesitated. "They concerned an arrangement between our government and a foreign power. Nothing that ought to reach the public eye. The information, if disclosed, could be of interest to, well, certain continental agents." "Precisely," said Holmes quietly. "And you believe Carrington might have betrayed you?" Pemberton flushed. "We do not believe it, sir. We fear it. There was no sign of struggle in his rooms. His clothes and money were gone. It looks very much like flight." Holmes's eyes half closed. "Yet a guilty man does not hide papers in the bag of a drunken vagrant. No, Mr. Pemberton, you're Mr. Carrington is more likely the victim of abduction than the author of theft." The official started. "Abduction? Good heavens!" "Consider it," Holmes went on. "He leaves the office with valuable papers. He disappears. Those papers, or part of them, reappear hidden in a house whose purpose is secrecy. And that same night, a stranger flees from that house, leaving behind an expensive glove belonging to Carrington. What explanation suits all these facts? Surely that he was compelled by force or threat to deliver up his documents, and that his captors used the empty house as a depot for their purposes." Lestrade whistled softly. "And the fellow we saw escape?" Holmes's mouth tightened. "An agent, certainly. Whether foreign or domestic, we shall learn. For the moment, we must locate Carrington. Alive or dead, he holds the key." Mr. Pemberton, pale and trembling, begged us to report any progress, and we took our leave. In the cab, Holmes sat motionless, his chin upon his hands. "The plot thickens, Watson. The spy ring uses that empty room as a dead drop. The murdered messenger we found yesterday, he was likely a go-between, silenced for knowing too much. But the central figure remains invisible. I shall require two things: Carrington's handwriting and access to his lodgings." Within the hour, Lestrade had arranged it. The rooms were modest but orderly, a clerk's domain. Books, ledgers, a small writing desk, and one curious item: a map of London with several streets marked in red pencil, among them Upper Montague Street. Holmes bent over it. "There is our confirmation. Carrington knew of the house. Whether willingly or by coercion, he was part of the arrangement." He examined the inkstand and papers, then, to my surprise, drew a small scrap from the wastebasket. "Ah, a torn letter, written in haste and never sent." He read aloud. "Cannot endure this double life. They watch even my own windows. If I fail to return, let them know I was forced. The rest was missing. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Forced, Watson. He was under surveillance, compelled, perhaps blackmailed. The watchers he mentions may be the very men across from Baker Street. Lestrade swore softly. Then, the man's life may still be in danger. Holmes pocketed the fragment. Indeed, and before another day ends, we must find where that danger leads. The game grows dark, my friends, but it is not beyond our reach. He straightened his coat, his voice calm and cold. Tonight, Watson, we return to the house. For if the conspirators have guessed that we meddle, they will not leave their hiding place empty for long. And when they come again, I mean to be waiting. It was nearly dusk when we reached Baker Street once more. Holmes had spoken little during the drive back from Whitehall, his features set in that curious stillness which was often the herald of great mental activity. He stood now at the window, the fading light touching his sharp profile, while I busied myself with lighting the fire and setting the lamp upon the table. "Watson," said he at length, "you observed the map we found among Carrington's effects. The red marks were not placed at random. They form a triangle, the centre of which lies precisely at Upper Montague Street. That house, therefore, is not merely convenient. It is central to the design. Its position allows observation in several directions, toward Baker Street, toward Marylebone Road, and toward the government offices beyond. Our adversary is not merely cautious, he is strategic." I nodded. "And you believe he will return there tonight?" "I am certain of it. The documents hidden in Mullins's bag were but fragments. The remainder must still be somewhere in that house, or were meant to be collected there by another agent. If Carrington is alive, he will be compelled to deliver the rest. If dead, then someone else must take his place." Holmes turned from the window, his eyes bright with determination. "We must be there before they are." We dined hastily and made our preparations. Holmes pocketed his revolver, his magnifying lens, and that curious assortment of small tools with which he could open any lock devised by man. As we stepped into the fog-laden street, I noticed that he wore dark gloves and had drawn his hat low over his brow. He was, in appearance, a nondescript gentleman, such as might pass anywhere unnoticed. At 9:30, we reached Upper Montague Street. The house stood silent, its facade dim under the yellow glare of the lamp. A thin wisp of fog curled about the doorstep, and not a soul stirred in the road. Holmes motioned me to wait in the shadow of the railings while he examined the door. It yielded easily. He had, with characteristic foresight, retained the key he had fashioned on our former visit. We entered noiselessly. The air inside was chill and still. Holmes held his lantern low, shielding its beam with his hand. "Note, Watson. The dust upon the floor has been disturbed since last night. Someone has come and gone." We ascended the stairs and made for the front room where we had surprised Mullins. The candle had burned down to a pool of wax, and the chair still stood before the window, facing Baker Street like a sentinel. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "They have been here again, and recently. The wax is soft, the flame extinguished within the hour." He crossed swiftly to the table and examined it. A faint smear of dampness showed where something had rested. A small box, perhaps, or packet. "Removed in haste," he murmured. "And here, see the mark. A square edge wrapped in paper. I fancy the missing documents have already passed through this room tonight." He turned down the lantern, leaving us in shadow. "We are late by minutes, Watson, but perhaps not too late. Wait, did you hear that?" From below came the faint creak of a board, followed by a soft thud as of a door closing. Holmes's face lit with sudden resolve. "They are still here. Follow closely." We descended, moving with infinite caution until we reached the rear of the house. The kitchen door was ajar, and through the gap we could see a thin line of lamplight. Holmes peered within. Two men stood there. One was short and thick-set, the other tall and elegantly dressed, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. Upon the table between them lay a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "You're sure this is the last of it?" the tall man asked in a low voice. "As sure as can be," the other replied. "Carrington had no chance to talk. He's lying at the bottom of the river. God help him." A sharp intake of breath escaped me, but Holmes's hand on my arm silenced it. His face was expressionless, but his eyes gleamed like steel. "Good," said the tall man. "Then this will go to our friend in Paris on the morning train. You have your instructions. I must not be seen." He turned toward the door and stopped short as Holmes stepped into the light. "I think not, Mr. Carrington," said my companion quietly. The man started violently, then tried to rush past us. Holmes caught him by the sleeve, and in an instant the room was in confusion. The smaller fellow made for the back door, but I intercepted him, and after a brief struggle had him pinned against the wall. Holmes, meanwhile, had forced the tall man to the table, where the lamp's glow revealed his features, pale, handsome, and unmistakably those of Henry Carrington himself. "So," said Holmes coolly, "the dead man rises." Carrington glared at him, breathing hard. "You have no right, no authority." "No, we shall see. Your glove, sir, betrayed you. Your cipher confirmed it. You have been watched since yesterday, and your attempt to recover these papers only completes the evidence against you." He turned to Lestrade, who at that moment burst in with two constables, having followed our trail by pre-arrangement. "Inspector, I believe your missing Foreign Office clerk has kindly presented himself." Lestrade wasted no time. "Henry Carrington, I arrest you on suspicion of treason and the murder of your accomplice. Anything you say may be used against you." Carrington's defiance faltered. His shoulders sagged and he sank into the nearest chair. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely. "It was never for money. I was trapped, blackmailed. They had letters that could ruin a name dearer to me than my own." Holmes regarded him gravely. "That may be, but the law is seldom moved by sentiment. Yet I believe you speak truth. Tell us who holds those letters." Carrington hesitated, then looked toward his captured companion. "Him. God forgive me. I thought he was my friend. Charles Durnford, the very man who brought me into the department. He found a weakness and used it." Lestrade's men hauled Durnford to his feet. He cursed and struggled, but resistance was useless. Holmes, meanwhile, untied the small parcel upon the table. Within lay the missing dispatches, still sealed. With a gesture of satisfaction, he handed them to Lestrade. "There, Inspector, are your stolen papers. The case, I think, is complete." As we returned to Baker Street that night, the fog had thickened, muffling the sounds of the city. Holmes walked in silence for some time, his face thoughtful. "At times, Watson," he said at last, "one finds pity intruding where reason would dictate scorn. Carrington was weak, but not vile. He was driven by fear, and in such soil treachery takes easy root. Yet he will live, and perhaps redeem himself. It is more than can be said for many in his profession. He paused at our own door and looked back once toward the dim outline of Upper Montague Street. The house without an owner, Watson, has found one after all. A man who owned too little of himself. There lies the tragedy. And with that, he mounted the steps, his cloak swirling in the mist, and vanished into the glow of our familiar sitting room. It was 2 days later when I found Holmes again immersed in the affair. Though the men responsible for the espionage were safely lodged in prison, and the Foreign Office had sent formal thanks for his intervention, my friend's restless mind was far from satisfied. There was, he said, a disquieting absence of finality, a missing piece that kept him turning the matter over as one might a locked box for which no key could be found. I arrived at Baker Street to find him surrounded by maps, newspaper cuttings, and official correspondence. His violin lay idle upon the sofa, the bow abandoned beside it. The smell of strong black coffee hung in the air. "You come at a fortunate moment, Watson," he said without looking up. "The curtain has not yet fallen on our little drama. There is an epilogue, and a dark one, I fear." "Surely, Holmes," said I, taking a chair, "you cannot doubt the guilt of Durnford and Carrington. The papers are recovered, the motives explained, the law satisfied." "Just so," he replied, with that peculiar gleam which always warned me that some hidden current of thought was flowing beneath his calm exterior. "And yet, if everything fits too neatly, one must look for the piece that was never meant to fit at all. Tell me, my dear fellow, what became of the murdered messenger?" "The cab victim," said I. "The body was taken to the mortuary. The Yard could not identify him. A foreigner, perhaps?" Holmes nodded. "Just so. A foreigner found in a cab whose route ended precisely opposite the house in Upper Montague Street. A man whom no one could name. Durnford denied knowing him. Carrington swore he had never seen him, and yet the fellow's boots matched the prints in that room. He was the connecting link, and he lies silent." He rose abruptly and reached for his hat. "Watson, there is something I must confirm. The case is not yet complete." We took a hansom to the mortuary in the Marylebone district, a grim, low building that seemed always enveloped in a chill mist. The attendant, accustomed to Holmes's visits, admitted us at once. The body lay beneath a white sheet, and when the attendant drew it back, I confess that even my medical training did not prevent a start of surprise. The man was middle-aged, dark, with high cheekbones and a thin moustache. His features bore that peculiar refinement one sometimes sees among educated men of Eastern Europe. But what caught Holmes's attention was not the face. It was the right wrist, where the skin was discolored by the pressure of a narrow bracelet or manacle. "A prisoner, or one recently so," Holmes murmured. "And see here, the thumb and first finger are stained by chemicals. A man who handles acids or develops photographs, perhaps." He bent lower, studying the dead man's nails, then straightened suddenly. "Watson, this man was no mere courier. He was a photographer, or rather, a copyist. His nails bear the silver stain of photographic paper, and his eyes, slightly inflamed, tell of long hours under artificial light. It was his task to reproduce the stolen documents, not to carry them. Therefore, he was no servant of Durnford, but an associate of someone higher, someone's still free. I stared. You mean there is yet another hand in the business? Undoubtedly, and one more cunning than all the rest. Durnford was a tool, Carrington a pawn. But this man, he gestured to the corpse, worked for an intelligence superior to either. The true owner of the room, Watson, is still at large. That evening, Holmes and I dined early, and when we returned to Baker Street, he threw himself into his armchair, eyes half closed, fingers together in meditation. At last, he said, "You recall, Watson, that on the first night we entered that house, the chair was placed directly before the window, facing our own. I said then that the arrangement was deliberate. Consider, why would anyone watch our rooms? Not Carrington. He feared the government, not me. Not Durnford. He had no cause to observe Baker Street. Who then?" I shook my head. "Someone," he continued softly, "who wished to know whether I had taken notice. Someone who feared my interference and desired to measure my movements. In short, the unseen master of the scheme." He sprang up suddenly and went to the mantelpiece, where a small card lay. It bore no signature, only a single sentence written in an elegant foreign hand. "The room is closed, but the door is not." Holmes smiled grimly. "This was delivered an hour ago. No envelope, no messenger seen. It was slipped beneath our door. The handwriting, Watson, is continental, German perhaps, or Austrian. Our opponent warns us or taunts us. Either way, he tells us that the game is not over." Before I could reply, a knock sounded below, and Mrs. Hudson's anxious voice announced Inspector Lestrade. The little detective entered briskly, his face grave. "Holmes," he said, "Carrington's dead, found in his cell an hour ago, strangled with his own handkerchief." A heavy silence followed. Holmes's expression did not change, but the muscles of his jaw tightened. "So," he said quietly, "the silencing begins." Lestrade laid a folded paper on the table. "We found this in his pocket. Thought you'd like to see it." Holmes unfolded the sheet. It contained only a few words, written in a bold foreign script identical to that on the card. "The debt is paid. The room belongs to no man." He looked up sharply. "Lestrade, was anyone admitted to the cells?" "No one but the guard, and he swears no one entered." Holmes turned away, his voice low. "Then we face an adversary of rare reach and resource. The same hand that slipped this note beneath my door has reached into a guarded cell. We are dealing with a power that moves in shadow, Inspector, a power not yet spent." He stood long before the fire after Lestrade had gone, his figure dark against the flickering light. "Watson," he said at last, "I shall have need of you tomorrow night. Bring your revolver and your patience. The room in Upper Montague Street will not remain empty long. Its true master will return to claim it, and I intend to be there when he does." The next evening found us once more in that sinister house. The fog pressed thickly against the windows, and every creak of the boards seemed magnified in the stillness. Holmes had arranged 2 chairs in shadow near the door, the lantern shaded, our pistols ready. The minutes crawled by. Midnight struck. Then faintly came the sound of a key turning in the lock. Holmes's hand tightened on my arm. "He comes," he whispered. The door opened and a tall figure stepped inside, a man in a dark cloak, his face half hidden by the brim of his hat. He moved directly to the center of the room, where the familiar chair still stood, and placed upon the table a small black box. Then, before we could stir, he spoke in a low, cultured voice. "I thought you would come, Mr. Holmes. I had hoped you would." Holmes rose slowly, and I saw a strange light in his eyes, the gleam of the hunter who has at last sighted his quarry. "Then, sir," he said calmly, "your hope is gratified. You will oblige me by removing your hat." The man laughed softly and obeyed. The lamplight fell upon a pale, intelligent face, foreign in aspect, yet oddly familiar. "Good heavens!" I exclaimed. "It is Baron Gruner!" Holmes's eyes flashed. "Precisely, Watson. The same Gruner who escaped the continent 3 years ago, when last we met in Vienna. I suspected as much." The Baron smiled coldly. "You see, Mr. Holmes, the room did have an owner after all. And tonight he has come to reclaim it." Holmes stepped forward. "Not to reclaim, Baron, but to surrender. The game ends here." The next instant the Baron moved, not toward Holmes, but toward the window. There was the glint of a revolver, a single shot, and the crash of glass. When we reached the sill, the fog swallowed all trace of him. Only the faint echo of his laughter drifted through the night. Holmes stood silent, his gaze fixed on the empty street below. "He is gone," he said at last. "But the curtain has not yet fallen, Watson. The room without an owner remains without one still." For several days after the dramatic encounter in the deserted house, Holmes was a man possessed by the case. The escape of Baron Gruner, whom he had believed dead these 3 years past, galvanized his mind into that peculiar intensity which, while astonishing to observe, rendered him unapproachable to all but the most urgent of matters. He sat for hours in his armchair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, the firelight flickering across his keen, aquiline face. I had known him in such moods before. They were preludes to some decisive movement, as the stillness before a storm. He neither ate nor spoke unless spoken to, and only the faint wisp of smoke from his pipe betrayed that he was still alive. On the third evening he roused himself abruptly. "Watson," said he, "I am going out. I shall return before dawn. Do not sit up for me." "Surely, Holmes, not alone," I protested. "The Baron is a desperate man." He smiled faintly. "My dear fellow, the Baron is desperate, yes, but he is also vain. Vanity and fear are a most instructive combination. Rest easy. I go only to observe." He would say no more, and I was left to a night of restless speculation. When he returned at daybreak, his coat was soaked with fog, his eyes red from lack of sleep, but there was an air of grim satisfaction about him. "The game draws to its close," he said simply. "I have followed our elusive friend to his lair." Over breakfast, he explained in his crisp, unemotional way that Gruner had taken refuge in a small lodging house near Bloomsbury under the name of Herr Otto Klein. His comings and goings were irregular. He received no visitors, yet messages were delivered at odd hours by a thin, dark-haired boy who vanished into the fog as soon as his errand was done. "What now?" I asked. "Now, Watson, we watch, but not from afar." By the following evening, Holmes had rented the adjoining rooms under the guise of an elderly German scholar. His disguise was masterly. Grey whiskers, spectacles, and a stoop that would have deceived his own brother. As for me, I was to pose as his nephew, newly arrived from the provinces. We installed ourselves quietly and waited. 2 nights passed without event, save for the occasional sound of Gruner's footsteps pacing the floor next door. On the third night, however, matters changed. At about 11 o'clock, there came the faint rumble of carriage wheels outside. Through a crack in the curtains, I saw a closed brougham draw up before the house. A woman alighted, a tall, graceful figure wrapped in a dark cloak. She hesitated a moment, then entered the building. Holmes's eyes glittered behind his spectacles. Ah, the spider's web attracts a moth. Let us see what pattern it weaves. We heard her ascend the stairs and knock softly at Gruner's door. A murmur of voices followed, too indistinct to catch the words, but the tones were urgent, emotional. Then silence. After 10 minutes, Holmes rose and took a stethoscope from his pocket. Placing it against the wall, he listened intently. His expression hardened. "Watson," he said, "the lady is in distress. Gruner has no mercy in him. We cannot wait." He crossed swiftly to the door and turned the handle. It opened without resistance. The passage beyond was dimly lit by a single gas jet. Holmes motioned me to follow, and we moved on cat-like feet toward the next door. From within came a woman's cry, stifled almost at once. Holmes struck the door open with his shoulder. The scene that met our eyes was brief but vivid. The woman stood near the table, her cloak torn, her eyes wide with terror. Facing her, revolver in hand, was the Baron. The lamplight gleamed on his cold, aristocratic features. For an instant, surprise held him motionless. Then he fired. The bullet splintered the doorpost beside my head. Before he could aim again, Holmes leapt upon him. The revolver clattered to the floor, and the two men grappled fiercely. Though Gruner was taller and of powerful build, he was no match for Holmes's wiry strength and trained precision. Within moments, the Baron lay face down upon the carpet, handcuffed and breathing hard. Holmes straightened and turned to the woman, whose face had gone as white as her lace collar. "You are unhurt, madam?" She nodded, trembling. I thank you. I feared... Oh, God, I thought he would kill me." "You are safe now," said Holmes gently. "Pray, sit down. I am Sherlock Holmes. May I ask your name?" "Miss Evelyn Carrington," she whispered. I started. "Carrington? The sister?" "The sister," Holmes confirmed quietly. "The letters he spoke of, her letters, no doubt. Baron Gruner's hold upon Henry Carrington was through her honor." The woman buried her face in her hands. "I thought to recover them tonight. He promised, if I came alone." Holmes's voice was steady and cold. "He promised nothing but ruin, madam. But you shall have justice instead. Watson, the constables we arranged with Lestrade are below. Be so good as to fetch them." Within minutes, the officers had Gruner in custody. He offered no resistance now, only a strange, sardonic smile. "You are clever, Mr. Holmes," he said, as they led him away. "But not clever enough. You have caught the shadow, not the man." When he was gone, Holmes stood long by the window, gazing into the night. "He is not altogether wrong, Watson," he said at last. "The Baron is a tool of greater powers. His reach extends beyond our borders. The house in Montague Street, the false lights, the coded papers, these were part of a larger design. But we have at least torn one thread from the web." He turned to Miss Carrington. "You have nothing more to fear. Your brother's name will be cleared and the letters destroyed." Her gratitude was beyond words. As she left us, I saw Holmes's expression soften, a rare glimpse of the human heart that beat beneath his logic. But when the door had closed, the shadow returned to his face. "Watson," he said quietly, "we have caught the serpent's tail, but its head is still abroad. Gruner's remark was no idle boast. There is someone who directed him from afar. Until that man is found, the case of the room without an owner remains unfinished. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with that strange inner fire I knew so well. And by all the reasoning powers I possess, I swear I shall find him. That night, as I lay awake listening to the faint, ceaseless hum of London beyond the window, I could not help but wonder whether Holmes had, at last, met an adversary worthy even of his formidable genius. For somewhere in the darkness, the true master of the game still watched and waited. It was upon the morning following the Baron's arrest that I first perceived how deeply the affair had seized upon my friend's imagination. Holmes had slept but an hour, yet was already at work before the fire, his pipe between his lips, a dozen sheets of paper spread across the carpet before him. His face bore that mixture of intellectual hunger and quiet ferocity which I had come to associate with the chase in its most delicate stages. "You will forgive me, Watson," said he, without raising his eyes from the notes before him, "if I speak somewhat abruptly. The Baron's capture was but the second act of our little drama. The third, I fear, begins today." He tapped the paper nearest him. "You will recall, perhaps, that the Baron, before his arrest, spoke of having caught the shadow, not the man. A theatrical remark, no doubt, yet I begin to think there was truth in it. I have spent the last few hours reconstructing his network as far as our knowledge extends. Observe." He indicated the neat columns he had drawn, names, dates, initials, and curious cipher marks. At the center stands Baron Gruner, the operative. Beneath him, Carrington, the compromised clerk, and Durnford, the go-between. Then our murdered copyist, whose name we still do not know. Above Gruner, however, here lies the gap. He took orders, Watson. He did not originate them. The man who gave those orders remains invisible. I could not refrain from exclaiming, "But surely, Holmes, the Baron himself was the moving spirit. The documents, the blackmail, the foreign correspondence, all bear his hand." He smiled faintly. "Superficially, yes. But consider, the Baron's character, as you saw last night, is that of an artist rather than a strategist. He plays with danger as another man with a game of chess. No, my dear fellow, there is another, a mind behind the mind, and I intend to uncover it. Holmes's deduction that morning led us first to Scotland Yard, where Lestrade, his usually cheerful manner somewhat subdued, awaited us in his office. "You'll be glad to know, Mr. Holmes," said he, "that your Baron has confessed. Not to everything, mind you, but enough to satisfy the department. He admits to espionage, to coercing Carrington, and to using that empty house for his operations. We're sending the Foreign Office papers under guard this very day." Holmes listened impassively. And what of the ciphered correspondence found among his effects? Lestrade shook his head. "Still a mystery. The code experts can make nothing of it. We thought it was German, but the pattern's unlike any of theirs." Holmes took a sheet from his pocket. "Permit me." He studied it for some minutes, tracing the columns with his finger. "No," he murmured. "Not German. Swiss, I should think. The phrasing is peculiar to Bern and Lucerne. Lestrade, have any inquiries been made regarding the Baron's recent communications abroad?" "Only that a number of letters passed through the Continental Post addressed to a Mr. H. Vogel, Geneva. Nothing suspicious there." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "On the contrary, that name has appeared before." He turned to me. "Watson, do you recall the diplomatic scandal 3 years ago, the one involving the theft of submarine plans from the Admiralty. I remembered it well. The case had caused a sensation at the time, and Holmes himself had been consulted in its early stages. The man behind that affair, Holmes continued, was a certain Heinrich Vogel, a Swiss engineer of great intelligence and unscrupulous ambition. He escaped capture and vanished. I believe our present adversary and Vogel are one and the same. Lestrade whistled. Then by heaven, Mr. Holmes, you've laid your hand on one of the cleverest rogues in Europe. Holmes rose. We have touched his shadow, Inspector, but not yet his person. Gruner's arrest will have warned him. He will move swiftly. You must telegraph the port authorities at once. No vessel from Dover or Tilbury must leave without inspection. By noon, we had returned to Baker Street, and Holmes's rooms became the centre of a storm of telegrams and reports. By evening, it was clear that no such man as Heinrich Vogel had left the country, nor had he been seen to enter it. He had, it seemed, melted into the fog. Holmes paced the room, restless, his face set like stone. We have one weapon left, Watson. Bait. Vogel is cautious, but his pride may yet betray him. If we spread the rumor that Gruner carried certain incriminating papers hidden in the room at Upper Montague Street, papers not yet recovered, he may come to claim them himself. And so, the snare was laid. Through discreet channels at the Yard and in the press, the story was circulated. That documents of immense importance had eluded discovery during the search of the Baron's quarters. It was whispered that these papers lay still hidden in the notorious room without an owner. For 3 nights we kept vigil in that gloomy house. The fog thickened, the street grew silent, and not a soul passed. Yet Holmes's patience was inexhaustible. He sat motionless for hours, his eyes fixed upon the door, his revolver resting lightly upon his knee. It was on the 4th night that the trap was sprung. The hour was close to 2 when Holmes, who had been listening intently, laid his hand upon my sleeve. "There," he whispered. "Do you hear it?" I strained my ears. From below came the faint scrape of a key turning in a lock. A moment later, the stealthy sound of a footstep crept through the silence. Holmes rose noiselessly and extinguished the lamp. The steps mounted the stairs, slow, measured, cautious. The door opened and a dark figure slipped into the room. He moved swiftly to the fireplace and knelt, prizing loose a small tile in the hearth. Holmes struck a match, and in its flare we saw the intruder's face. Narrow, intelligent, cruel. "Good evening, Mr. Vogel," said Holmes quietly. The man started violently, then sprang to his feet, revolver flashing from his pocket. The shot went wide, burying itself in the plaster. Holmes fired once in return, shattering the weapon from his hand. In an instant, we had him pinned. He fought savagely, but Holmes's grasp was iron. "It is useless," said he coldly. "The room you used for your secrets has turned against you. You are the last owner of the room without an owner." When Lestrade arrived with his men, Vogel had ceased struggling. His composure returned with astonishing rapidity, and as they led him away, he cast one glance back at Holmes. "You have triumphed, Herr Holmes," he said softly. "But remember, rooms without owners may always find new tenants." Holmes watched him go without reply. Only when the footsteps had faded did he turn to me. "It is done, Watson. The web is cut at last. The Baron, the clerk, the spy, all strands of one design, and the design destroyed." He looked about the desolate chamber, where the candle flickered upon bare walls and dust. "Strange, is it not," he murmured, "that a simple, empty room should have housed so much fear, deceit, and death? Yet in the end, it stands silent once more, its secrets spent." And thus, as dawn crept over London, Sherlock Holmes closed the door upon that sinister place, and we walked back through the pale mist toward Baker Street, the echoes of our steps fading like the last whisper of a mystery resolved. The events of The Room Without an Owner might well have ended with the capture of Heinrich Vogel, had it not been for the strange postscript that followed, a chapter as curious as any in the annals of Sherlock Holmes. For even as the newspapers congratulated Scotland Yard upon its triumph, and Holmes's name was once more upon every tongue, there occurred a sequel so unexpected that it shook even my friend's iron composure. It was early one fog-laden morning, scarcely a week after Vogel's arrest, when I entered our sitting room to find Holmes standing motionless before the mantelpiece. He held a small envelope in his hand, and the expression upon his face, half incredulity, half grim amusement, told me at once that the letter was of no common sort. "You come at a fortunate moment, Watson," said he. "Here is a missive that will interest you. It was brought by special messenger not 10 minutes ago." He handed me the envelope. It was of heavy cream paper, sealed with black wax. There was no superscription save the single word, "Return." I broke the seal. Inside was a sheet of plain writing paper, upon which were traced the following words in a bold foreign hand. "You have caught the shadow, but the master walks still. There are rooms beyond rooms, Mr. Holmes, and doors you have yet to open." No signature, no address, not even a clue to the writer. "Vogel's hand?" I asked. Holmes shook his head. "No, I have compared it with his prison statement. The hand differs entirely. Whoever wrote this message is still free and means to taunt me. Observe the phrase, rooms beyond rooms. A metaphor, no doubt, but one which suggests a continuation of the organization. Vogel may have been a lieutenant only." He moved to the window and stood looking out at the streaming mist that blurred the outlines of Baker Street. "This letter was delivered by a cabman who received it from a veiled lady at Charing Cross. She refused to give her name. Our adversary, Watson, is no ordinary criminal, but one who commands resources and, what is rarer still, imagination. His mood that day was one of fierce, cold concentration. Before noon, he had visited Scotland Yard, conferred with Lestrade, and returned with the information that Vogel refused to speak further. "He laughs at the notion of accomplices," said Holmes. "He says his work is done, and that the door is closed. I begin to suspect that, for him at least, it soon will be, perhaps by a means not of our law's choosing." His words proved prophetic. 3 nights later, a message was brought by Lestrade himself. Vogel was dead, found in his cell at dawn, a faint smile upon his lips, and a fragment of grey ash upon the floor near his hand. The warder swore no one had entered. The door had been locked all night. The prison doctor declared it poison, cyanide, administered by some unknown device. Holmes listened without surprise. "So," he said quietly, "the unseen master has silenced another voice. That makes 3. Carrington, Gruner, and now Vogel. The list grows, but the directing hand remains hidden." "Do you think," I ventured, "that he fears you, Holmes?" He smiled thinly. He fears nothing. He plays a game of intellect, and I am but a piece upon his board. Yet every game must end, and I intend to force his move. From that moment, Holmes set himself to trace the final link. He worked with feverish energy, visiting embassies, telegraph offices, and shipping companies. He examined letters intercepted by the police, read foreign newspapers, and even, to my astonishment, consulted the archives of the Vatican through an intermediary. For 3 days and nights, he scarcely ate or slept. It was late on the 4th evening when he returned, pale and hollow-eyed, but triumphant. "Watson, the circle is closing. The master we seek hides under the name of Augusto Rinaldi, an Italian art dealer recently arrived from Vienna. He rented rooms last month in Fitzroy Square, within walking distance of Montague Street. There he directs what remains of Vogel's network under the guise of an importer of curiosities. Have you proof? Enough to justify a visit. He has made one mistake. He wrote to Vogel the night before his arrest, arranging a meeting. The letter was intercepted by the police, but through carelessness, its signature was torn away. I have matched the remaining handwriting to that of our anonymous note. Within the hour, we were in Lestrade's company once more, and together we drove through the thickening fog toward Fitzroy Square. The house in question stood dark and silent, its windows shuttered, its front door locked. Holmes produced a skeleton key, and, with Lestrade's sanction, we entered. The interior was richly furnished, though the air carried that same lifeless stillness I had come to associate with the other rooms of this strange affair. Holmes's lantern threw moving patches of light upon cabinets filled with porcelain and glass, upon tapestries and bronze figures that gleamed dully in the gloom. In the center of the main room stood a writing table. Upon it lay a single object, a small black leather portfolio. Holmes opened it. Inside were several sheets of thick parchment covered with diagrams and notes in German. At the top of each page was stamped a red crest, the Imperial Eagle of Austria. "Naval designs," Holmes murmured. Vogel's work continued, and this, he turned over another page. A list of agents, half of whom are already in custody. The rest... He stopped abruptly, his eyes fixed upon the final line. There, in the neat, slanted hand we had come to know, were the words, "And finally, to observe the movements of Mr. Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street." I uttered an exclamation, but Holmes only smiled. "So, I have been under scrutiny once more. Well, that is the risk of our profession." He turned to Lestrade. "Have your men searched the house? Rinaldi is gone, but he cannot be far." The search was thorough but fruitless. Not a trace of the Italian was found, though the rear door bore signs of recent use. We left the house shortly before dawn, the fog curling about us like smoke from a dying fire. At Baker Street, Holmes threw himself into his chair and lit his pipe with a long sigh. "The master escapes, Watson, but for how long? Each link we break weakens the chain. Rinaldi, Vogel, Gruner, each served a cause, not a country. And behind them all stands a principle as cold as mathematics, the pursuit of knowledge without conscience." He sat silent a long while, the smoke wreathing upward about his gaunt face. Then, very softly, he said, "There may, perhaps, always be another room, another owner, but so long as I draw breath, there shall also be a lock and a man to turn the key." And with that quiet declaration, he rose, took down his violin, and played a low, haunting melody, so soft that it seemed but a whisper in the grey dawn, the final lament for the secrets of the room that had no master. Several weeks passed before I again found myself drawn into the currents of the affair that London had already begun to forget. Newspapers, ever hungry for novelty, had turned their attention to fresher scandals. The public believed that the espionage network had been shattered, the papers recovered, and its chief conspirators either dead or safely imprisoned. Yet I, who lived within the orbit of Sherlock Holmes, knew that beneath his outward calm there stirred an unease that no victory could wholly satisfy. During those quiet days in Baker Street, I often caught him seated motionless, gazing into the fire with that peculiar abstraction which always heralded the birth of some new deduction. Sometimes he would rouse himself with sudden energy, scribble a few lines upon a scrap of paper, and thrust it into his pocketbook. At other times, he would pace the floor for hours, head bent, hands clasped behind his back, a figure of restless intellect at war with itself. One bleak February morning, I found him thus occupied. The fire had burned low, the morning papers lay unopened, and his breakfast stood untouched. "My dear Holmes," I ventured, "you brood upon this business like a physician upon a patient who refuses to recover. Surely the case is closed." "Closed, Watson?" "No, merely concluded," he answered quietly. "There is a distinction. A case may be concluded by chance, yet remain logically incomplete. Consider, Rinaldi, the supposed head of the organization, vanished without trace. His network dissolved, yes, but where is he? A man of such resource does not disappear like smoke. He leaves a residue, invisible but tangible. You think he still hides in London? I think," said Holmes, "that he never left it." He rose abruptly and crossed to his desk. "During the last week, 3 separate attempts have been made to obtain information from the Foreign Office. Each was subtle, professional, and abortive. The hand behind them is familiar. I have here a note sent yesterday to one of our informants, a note which bears Rinaldi's peculiar phrasing. He signs it now as A.R., but the style is unmistakable. The man is mocking us from within the very walls of the city." As he spoke, Mrs. Hudson entered with a visiting card upon a tray. Holmes glanced at it and raised his brows. "Ah, Inspector Lestrade. Timely, as always. Show him in." The little detective bustled in, his bowler hat damp with drizzle, and his expression unusually grave. "Holmes," said he, "you'll not thank me for disturbing you, but something queer has turned up. There's been a burglary in Fitzroy Square, the same house where you and I arrested Vogel's confederates. Only this time, there's no sign of forced entry. The caretaker swears the place was locked, yet the rooms have been ransacked from top to bottom." Holmes's eyes flashed. "And what was taken?" "Nothing that we can discover. The curios and furniture remain untouched, but there was a smell of chemicals in the air, and on the desk we found a curious thing, a slip of paper with your own name written upon it." He handed over a small envelope. Inside was a narrow strip torn from a ledger page, upon which, in a foreign hand, were the words, "Sherlock Holmes is invited to the room again." Holmes read it twice, then smiled grimly. "So, the game begins anew. Watson, fetch your coat. Lestrade, we go at once." Within the hour, we stood once more in that melancholy house. The fog outside pressed against the windows like a living thing. The rooms echoed hollowly beneath our steps. On the table lay the remnants of a small glass vial, shattered to fragments. Holmes knelt beside it, sniffed cautiously, and nodded. Hydrocyanic acid, deadly but volatile. Someone prepared it here within the last 12 hours. See also this mark upon the floor, a shoe print, narrow and high-arched. An Italian's foot, no doubt. Our friend Rinaldi has returned to erase his traces and found instead that the house itself remembers too much. He moved methodically from room to room, pausing often to examine trifles invisible to any but his singular eye. A displaced chair, a speck of dust upon the wainscot, the faint outline of a square upon the mantelpiece where some object had recently stood. At length he stopped and uttered a low exclamation. "Watson, look here!" He pointed to the hearthstone. A narrow crack ran along its edge, and from it projected the corner of an envelope. With delicate precision, he drew it out. It was sealed with red wax and addressed in fine slanted handwriting, "To Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Baker Street." Holmes broke the seal. Within were a single sheet of paper and a small photograph. The photograph was of Rinaldi himself, handsome, smiling, perfectly composed. Beneath it were written the words, "When a room has no owner, it belongs to the one who understands it. Come alone if you would know the truth." The paper bore an address, an obscure street in Limehouse near the river. Lestrade swore under his breath. "It's a trap, Holmes." "Undoubtedly," said my friend coolly, folding the letter. "But it is one baited with truth, and I never decline such invitations. Watson, will you accompany me?" "Do you need to ask?" "Excellent. Lestrade, place your men discreetly around the area, but make no move until I signal. If I am not out within the hour, you may break in." The fog lay thick over the river as we reached Limehouse that night. The address led us to a narrow passage between two warehouses, at the end of which stood a small door, half concealed by a stack of barrels. Holmes turned the handle and entered. The air within was heavy with damp and oil. A single lantern burned low, casting long shadows across the bare floor. At the far end of the room sat a man at a desk. He rose as we approached. His face was pale but composed, his dark eyes alert beneath arched brows. "Mr. Holmes," he said with a slight inclination, "you honor my invitation. Rinaldi, I presume." "The same." He gestured to two chairs. "You are punctual. That is good. A punctual man is one who respects time. And time, Mr. Holmes, is the only true master." Holmes regarded him with quiet curiosity. "You have gone to much trouble to summon me. Why?" "Because," said Rinaldi, "you and I are alike. You seek truth for its own sake. I seek it for power. You destroy webs. I weave them. But each of us understands the other better than our own kind." Holmes's eyes never left the man's face. "And what truth would you show me tonight?" Rinaldi smiled faintly. "That every prison has two keys, and every secret two keepers. Vogel's death, Gruner's fall. Do you think these were my doing? I served another, as did they. You call him the master. I call him inevitable." Before Holmes could reply, there came a sudden sound from outside. The crash of a door forced open the shouts of men. Rinaldi's smile deepened. "You see, the hour ends." He reached swiftly into his coat. Holmes sprang forward, but too late. There was a sharp report, a puff of acrid smoke, and Rinaldi fell back across the desk, a pistol clattering from his hand. When Lestrade burst in moments later, the man was already dead. Holmes stood over the body, his face expressionless. "Another door closed, Watson," he said quietly. "And still no key." We searched the room but found only a small sealed packet. Inside were notes, maps, and a single unfinished letter. To the one who comes after, there is always another room. Holmes read it without comment, then placed it carefully in his pocket. "The house of riddles is never empty," he murmured. "We have merely shut one of its many doors." As we walked back through the misty streets toward Baker Street, the river fog thick around us, I saw his gaunt face outlined against the gaslight, calm yet haunted. I knew that in his mind, the case was far from ended. For every mystery solved in his world, another waited, silent, patient, and ownerless still. Several months passed after the death of Augusto Rinaldi, and London, ever forgetful of yesterday's terrors, turned again to its endless pursuit of trade and pleasure. Yet beneath that veneer of complacency, there remained, for me at least, a sense of unfinished business. Holmes had closed the physical chapter of the case, but I could tell that in his mind it lingered, an unanswered riddle whose whisper refused to fade. Our days at Baker Street resumed their accustomed rhythm. Clients came and went. Telegrams arrived from distant parts of the empire seeking Holmes's opinion on some obscure crime. And now and again, we enjoyed a week of quiet leisure, broken only by the rustle of newspapers or the scraping of Holmes's bow upon his violin. Yet, in all his moods, there remained something withdrawn, almost brooding. I recall one evening in particular when he sat long before the fire, the blue smoke curling lazily upward, his eyes fixed upon the dancing embers. "Watson," said he suddenly, "have you ever reflected how curious it is that evil, like a contagion, spreads through the channels of intellect rather than passion? The man of brute impulse commits his crime and is done, but the man of thought must ever continue. He cannot resist the temptation to prove his superiority." I smiled. "You speak of Rinaldi, perhaps?" "Of him, and of others beyond him," Holmes replied quietly. "Do you suppose, my dear fellow, that such a network as his could be destroyed by the mere death of a single mind? No. The true danger lies not in the individual, but in the idea that gives him life. I fear the affair of the room without an owner may yet have sequels of a kind we cannot foresee." It was as if fate itself conspired to prove his words. For hardly a week had passed when Mrs. Hudson brought in a telegram addressed to him. Holmes opened it and handed it silently to me. It bore the signature of Inspector Lestrade and contained but one line. "Come at once to Charing Cross Station. A man has been found dead in a compartment, papers identical with Vogel's cipher on his person." Within the hour, we were on the scene. The fog had thickened, and the great station loomed like some cavern of iron and smoke. In one of the waiting rooms, the body of the unfortunate man lay stretched upon a bench, a small valise beside him. Lestrade, his face ruddy with excitement, met us at the door. "Strangest business I've ever seen, Mr. Holmes," said he. "The man boarded the midnight train from Dover alone. The guard swears he was alive when they left Canterbury. When they arrived here at dawn, he was dead. Poisoned, the doctor says. And look what we found in his bag." He opened the valise and displayed a sheaf of papers covered in the familiar cipher. Columns of numbers, interspersed with letters and strange symbols. Holmes bent over them eagerly. "The same hand indeed," he murmured. "And note, these are newer, more complex. The code evolves, Watson. Even though its creator perished months ago, someone continues his work. Lestrade shrugged. If you ask me, it's just some poor fool carrying messages for what's left of that spy lot. We'll trace his companions soon enough. Holmes said nothing, but I saw from the gleam in his eyes that the case had rekindled the fire of his curiosity. "Inspector," said he, "have you any clue to the man's identity?" "None. His papers are false. Foreign, by the look of him. Italian or Swiss, like the others." Holmes turned the body's hand palm upward. "The same chemical stain," he observed. "A copyist again, one who worked in secret and paid the price. But what was he copying?" He examined the papers minutely, then looked up. "These are fragments only, the middle portions of a message. The beginning and end are missing. The remainder must be somewhere close. Watson, let us search the carriage." The compartment was soon found. Holmes's eye, trained to the faintest irregularity, at once noted a corner of paper protruding from beneath the seat. He drew it out. It was a half-burned scrap, bearing in the same cipher a short phrase. With his pencil, Holmes transcribed it into his notebook. "The room is not empty. The key lies with the woman. Curious, Watson, very curious. And yet it fits the pattern." He pocketed the scrap and turned abruptly to Lestrade. "Inspector, you must make inquiries regarding any female passengers who travelled upon that train. This note suggests an accomplice, perhaps one of those silent watchers who prefer the edge of danger to the heart of it." By evening, the results were in. A lady had indeed shared the same carriage for part of the journey, a Mrs. Amelia Vernet, who had disembarked at Chatham. She had given a French address, but left no further clue. "Vernet," Holmes repeated when he heard the name. "I have encountered it before. There was a Vernet in Vogel's earlier correspondence, his associate in Geneva. If this woman be related, the chain tightens." The following morning, Holmes announced his intention of visiting Chatham in person. "It is there, Watson, that we shall find the next link in the chain. This cipher is a summons, not a message. Someone, somewhere, still calls to the empty room." We arrived by the afternoon train and soon traced Mrs. Vernet to a small inn overlooking the harbour. She was a woman of perhaps 35, elegantly dressed but pale and nervous. When Holmes introduced himself, she started violently and made as if to leave, but his quiet assurance soon mastered her fear. "You need not be alarmed, madam," said he. "We are not agents of the law, but seekers of truth. You have lately travelled from Dover, I believe, in company with a man now deceased. His death was not of your doing, but you can tell us something of his errand." The woman hesitated, twisting her gloves in her trembling hands. "I know little," she murmured. "He gave his name as Keller. He told me he was bringing certain letters from Geneva to London, letters that concerned the safety of a man you call Holmes." Holmes inclined his head gravely. "Indeed? And did he tell you to whom these letters were to be delivered?" "No, only that if anything happened to him, I was to post this." She opened her purse and produced a small sealed envelope. Holmes took it carefully, broke the seal, and read aloud the brief contents. "To Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the work continues. The woman holds the key." He smiled faintly. "Then the writer has been as good as his word. You, madam, are that key, whether you know it or not. Tell me, did Keller mention a name, a place, Any phrase that might explain his errand? She shook her head, tears starting to her eyes. Only this. He said the room was waiting, and that the owner would soon return. Holmes rose, his expression unreadable. Thank you, Mrs. Vernet. You have rendered a service of greater weight than you imagine. Go back to France at once. There are forces moving in London of which it is better you know nothing. That night, as we travelled homeward, I asked what he had learned. He leaned back in the carriage, his face pale in the flickering lamplight. Watson, the case is not ended. The words of that cipher, the woman holds the key, refer not to Mrs. Vernet, but to another, one whose shadow lies still across this affair. Do you not recall Evelyn Carrington? The sister of the clerk. Surely she has been cleared of all suspicion. Cleared, yes, but perhaps not safe. I fear that through her, our unseen adversary may strike once more. The game, my dear fellow, is reopening upon the same board, and I begin to think that the final act of this curious drama has yet to be played. He turned his face to the darkened window, the reflection of the lamp glimmering in his eyes like twin points of steel. The room, Watson, he said softly, is not empty after all. The grey skies of March hung low over London when the shadows of the room without an owner once more crept across Baker Street. I had hoped, as many times before, that the strange affair had run its course, that the dead would lie quietly in their graves, and the living might turn their thoughts to more ordinary matters. Yet one glance at Holmes's face as I entered our sitting room was enough to tell me that the wheel of intrigue had begun to turn again. Upon the table before him lay a folded newspaper, open at the column of latest intelligence. He looked up as I entered, his grey eyes gleaming with that light which always appeared when some new discovery had set his mind in motion. "Watson," said he, tapping the paper, "do you recall my prophecy that the room had not yielded its last secret?" "I remember it all too well," I replied, "and I trust you are not about to prove yourself correct." He smiled grimly. "I fear, my dear fellow, that events will take little heed of our preferences. Read this." The paragraph was short, yet sinister in its brevity. "A tragic occurrence took place last night in Bloomsbury. Miss Evelyn Carrington, sister of the late Henry Carrington of the Foreign Office, was found unconscious in her rooms at Woburn Place, suffering from the effects of a narcotic. She is now in a precarious condition. No sign of forced entry was discovered, but a foreign-made cigarette case was found upon the floor." I laid down the paper with a start. "Good heavens, Holmes! The sister, again!" "Precisely," said he, rising. "The woman who, if you remember, was once the unwilling pivot of the whole conspiracy. Her brother's disgrace was wrought to protect her. Gruner used her as bait. Rinaldi spoke of her as the key. And now she is struck down in her own home by the same invisible hand. There can be no accident here, Watson. This is design." Within the hour, we were at Woburn Place. The modest lodging-house presented an air of melancholy calm, disturbed only by the faint murmur of a policeman's voice at the door. We were admitted by the landlady, a frightened woman who led us upstairs to a small sitting room where the tragedy had occurred. Holmes examined the scene with minute attention. Miss Carrington had been removed to hospital, but the faint odour of chloroform still lingered in the air. On the carpet lay the cigarette case mentioned in the report, a delicate silver thing engraved with foreign initials, A.R. "Rinaldi," I breathed. Holmes nodded. Yes, and yet no. This, you see, is newer than the one we saw at Limehouse. It was manufactured in Milan scarcely a month ago. Therefore, it cannot have belonged to the man who died. Someone has revived his name, his signature, to conceal their own. He moved to the writing desk and examined a half-burned candle, a scrap of ribbon, and a folded sheet of notepaper. "Observe," said he. "A letter begun, but never finished. Read the few words that remain." The paper trembled slightly in my hand as I read aloud. "I have done all that was asked. The key is safe. He will come tonight." Holmes took the letter from me and held it to the light. The handwriting is hers. The words, "He will come tonight." Watson, this means she was expecting a visitor. Someone she trusted or pretended to trust. And that person, mark me, administered the narcotic. Lestrade entered at that moment, breathless and brisk as ever. "Ah, Mr. Holmes, I thought to find you here. A queer case, this. We can make nothing of it. The lady will recover, they say, but she's still unconscious. The cigarette case is our only clue." Holmes smiled thinly. "Clues, Inspector, are plentiful. It is the correct pattern that is rare. Tell me, were there footprints outside the window?" "None. The night was dry, and the sill shows no mark of climbing." "Then the visitor entered by the door and left the same way. Did the servants hear anything?" "Not a sound. The landlady says Miss Carrington was in good spirits at supper. She retired about 10, and the alarm was raised at 11. Holmes drew his watch. "An hour, then, in which all was done. It will suffice. Lestrade, have you detained anyone?" "No one, sir. There's not a shred of evidence." Holmes turned away. "Evidence lies always before us, Inspector. It is interpretation that fails. Come, Watson, we shall visit the hospital." We found Miss Carrington pale but recovering. She recognized Holmes at once, and her eyes filled with tears. "You warned me, Mr. Holmes," she whispered faintly, "but I thought the danger past. Last night he came, so quietly, so courteously, that I had no fear until it was too late." "Who came, madam?" Holmes asked gently. She hesitated. "He called himself Rinaldi." "Rinaldi," I exclaimed. "Impossible. He is dead." Holmes's face was unreadable. "Describe him, I beg." She closed her eyes in concentration. Tall, dark, foreign in manner, but his voice, it was softer, not the same. He said he came to recover something that belonged to his master. He spoke of a key, and when I asked him what he meant, he smiled and offered me a cigarette. I remember no more. Holmes leaned closer. "This key? Did you know to what he referred?" She shook her head weakly. "Only that my brother once entrusted me with a small box. I returned it to him years ago. It held papers, letters, I think." Holmes rose, his expression grave. "Thank you, Miss Carrington. You have told me much." Outside the ward, he turned to me. "The impostor who calls himself Rinaldi sought that same box. It must contain the last remnants of Vogel's cipher, perhaps even the identity of the true master behind it all. We must find it before he does." That night saw us once more at 221B Baker Street, the familiar fire burning cheerfully despite the storm that howled beyond the windows. Holmes sat long in silence, his brows drawn. At last, he spoke. "Watson, the name of Rinaldi is but a mask. Behind it stands another, a mind subtle enough to revive a dead man's legend for its own ends. There is one possibility that haunts me." "Who?" He looked up, his eyes dark with intensity. Do you recall Baron Gruner's dying words? He said, "You have caught the shadow, not the man." Suppose that shadow had a name, a shape, one that has watched us all this time from the darkness. There is a hand directing these renewed assaults, and I believe it is not foreign at all, but English. I stared at him. You mean someone within the government? Perhaps, or near enough to touch it. Tomorrow we shall call upon the Foreign Office once more. There is a certain Undersecretary, Pemberton, whose conduct in the earlier stages of this affair I never wholly trusted. We shall see whether his courtesy hides guilt. He rose and threw his coat about him. Sleep, Watson, if you can. The morrow may bring the revelation of the true owner of the room. I lay long awake that night, haunted by the memory of Miss Carrington's pallid face and Holmes's sombre foreboding. It seemed to me that we were once again upon the edge of peril, that the circle, long thought broken, was closing upon us both. And somewhere in the heart of London, unseen and patient, the man who called himself Rinaldi, or what remained of him, was waiting for the final move in this deadly game. The following morning dawned bitterly cold. A thin frost had formed upon the windows of Baker Street, and the air carried that peculiar stillness which often precedes a storm. Holmes was already dressed and at work by the time I awoke, his breakfast untouched, his violin lying idle upon the chair beside him. He had spent the night, I suspected, not in sleep, but in meditation, and the light that burned in his eyes told me that his course was fixed. "Watson," said he as I entered, "today will decide whether the room without an owner is finally closed, or whether its door shall open again upon darker depths. I have made certain inquiries during the night. They confirm my suspicion." "And that is?" I asked. "That the shadow behind all these intrigues has an English name, and that name is Pemberton." I started. "The Undersecretary? Impossible! Why, the man seemed terrified when the papers were stolen, grateful to you for saving them." Holmes smiled faintly. "Precisely. Too grateful, too fearful. The perfect mask of guilt concealed beneath duty. You will remember that the Baron and Vogel both corresponded with an unnamed official in London who provided them with access to confidential documents. That official must have been within the Foreign Office itself. Who, then, had both authority and motive? Who, after Carrington's disappearance, handled the investigation and kept the truth from reaching Parliament? Only one man, Pemberton. I was silent for a moment. "And Miss Carrington's attack?" "Part of the same pattern," said Holmes. "She knew the location of the last cipher papers. Pemberton, learning that the false Rinaldi had failed, attempted to recover them himself. When she resisted, he silenced her, temporarily. But he made one error, Watson. One fatal error. The cigarette case." He drew it from his pocket and held it to the light. "Observe the engraving, the initials AR, and beneath them, so faint that only my lens detected it, the outline of another pair, CP for Charles Pemberton. He ordered the case in Milan and sought to disguise it as Rinaldi's. Vanity betrayed him. Before noon, we were on our way to Whitehall. Pemberton received us in his office with his usual composure, though I thought the faintest flicker of unease crossed his features as Holmes's keen gaze met his own. The room was elegant but bare, its large windows admitting a pale winter light that seemed to emphasize the man's pallor. "My dear Holmes," he began with a constrained smile, This is an unexpected pleasure. Have you discovered new developments in that tiresome case? Holmes bowed slightly. Indeed, I have. A development so remarkable that I could not delay bringing it to your notice. He drew from his pocket a sealed envelope. This was recovered last night from Miss Carrington's lodgings. It bears your handwriting, Mr. Pemberton. The Undersecretary's hand trembled as he took it. My handwriting? I fear you are mistaken. Open it, sir. He hesitated, then broke the seal. Within was a single sheet, blank. Holmes's voice was quiet but implacable. You see, Mr. Pemberton, I am quite aware that you destroyed the original letter you sent to Vogel under the name of Rinaldi. Fortunately, the ash it left behind was sufficient for me to reproduce the watermark and the impression of your pen. You corresponded with Vogel for nearly a year, using the espionage network to enrich yourself and conceal the sale of government secrets. When Carrington discovered your treachery, you blackmailed him into silence through his sister's reputation. The rest followed naturally. Pemberton rose, his face ashen. This is monstrous. You have no proof. None. Holmes's hand shot out, placing upon the desk the silver cigarette case. This, sir, is my proof. It bears your mark and the smell of chloroform used upon Miss Carrington. Shall we summon Lestrade, or will you make a cleaner end of it? For an instant, the man's self-control faltered. His lips moved, but no sound came. Then, with a sudden gesture, he snatched open a drawer, seized a revolver, and placed it against his temple. I sprang forward, but Holmes was swifter. With a dexterous movement, he struck the weapon aside. It discharged harmlessly into the ceiling. Pemberton collapsed into his chair, covering his face with his hands. "It is useless," said Holmes coldly. "The game is over." Lestrade, summoned by a prearranged signal, entered moments later. He took in the scene with a glance. "So, it was the Undersecretary all along," he muttered. "By George, Mr. Holmes, I should have known you'd get to the bottom of it." Pemberton was led away in silence. As the door closed behind him, Holmes turned to me, his expression grave. "It is a melancholy end, Watson. The man was not without talent, even courage. Yet ambition, the unholy thirst for power, drove him into that abyss from which there is no return. That evening we sat before our familiar hearth. Holmes smoked in thoughtful silence for some time before speaking. "It is curious," he said, "how every crime breeds its own sequence, as though the moral world demanded completion. The house in Upper Montague Street was but a stage, a theatre of deceit, wherein each actor played his part until the curtain fell. Carrington, Gruner, Vogel, Rinaldi, they were but reflections cast by the greater shadow of Pemberton." He leaned back, the firelight gleaming upon his sharp features. "Yet mark you, Watson, even he was not the prime mover. Behind him, I suspect, lay influences too vast and subtle for proof, forces that stretch beyond our island's shores. Pemberton was dear instrument, as others will be in time. The room, without an owner, may stand empty tonight, but its door can open again whenever greed or treason demands it." I looked at him uneasily. "You speak as though the case were unfinished." He smiled faintly. "To a detective, no case is ever finished, my dear fellow. There is only the interval between acts." At that moment, a knock sounded below, and Mrs. Hudson's voice announced a messenger. Holmes broke the seal of the telegram and handed it to me. "Baron Gruner's villa in Vienna entered last night. Secret room discovered beneath library containing documents signed CP. Your undersecretary beyond question. Congratulations. Holmes's eyes softened. So, the circle is complete at last. Proof enough even for the most skeptical jurist. He tossed the paper into the fire, where it curled and blackened. Come, Watson. Let us have no more of ghosts tonight. The world is dark enough without recalling its shadows. And yet, he paused, listening to the crackle of the flames. If ever I hear again of a house that stands empty, yet is not empty, a door that opens for no man, yet admits the guilty, I shall know that the spirit of that room still walks abroad. He rose, drew the curtains against the bleak London night, and reached for his violin. As the first low notes filled the air, I felt that the last echo of that sinister affair had indeed passed away, leaving only the haunting music of Holmes's bow to remind me of the mysteries that had gathered once around the room without an owner. Spring had touched London at last, though its breath was still cold and uncertain. Trees in Regent's Park showed a hint of green, and a pale sunlight lay upon the roofs of Baker Street. It was upon such a morning, bright and brittle, that Sherlock Holmes finally laid to rest the long and tortuous affair of the room without an owner. Yet even now, with the culprit unmasked and justice satisfied, there lingered in Holmes's mind that peculiar unrest which no success could wholly calm. His restless fingers tapped upon the arm of his chair. His sharp gaze wandered from the fire to the window and back again, as though the flickering light and the drifting clouds held each some fragment of the riddle he could not forget. "Watson," said he at last, "do you recall what Pemberton cried when the handcuffs closed upon him?" "His words were incoherent," said I. "Something about serving a greater power." "Exactly," Holmes replied. "And therein lies the sting. The man believed himself a patriot, no common spy, but the instrument of an ideal. He fancied that he betrayed his country for her own salvation. Such reasoning is the most dangerous poison known to the human mind." He rose and paced before the fire. "You see, Watson, treason of the intellect is the most insidious of crimes. It begins in the study, not the slum. It is born of vanity, not need. Pemberton was clever, ambitious, and weak. The mixture is fatal. One imagines he told himself that he sold secrets only to control them, to guide them back into safe hands. In the end, of course, he guided nothing but his own destruction." I nodded. "And yet, Holmes, you seem discontented. Surely the case has been solved with finality. The Foreign Office is cleared, Miss Carrington is safe, and the house in Montague Street stands empty once more." "Empty?" Holmes turned sharply, his eyes kindling. "Nothing is ever truly empty, my dear fellow. That house is like the mind of man. It may appear bare, yet every whisper of the past lingers within its walls. I wonder sometimes whether places like people remember." Before I could reply, Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram. Holmes tore it open, read the contents, and handed it to me. "From Vienna. Pemberton dead in prison. Poison. Same method as Vogel. Paper on body reads only, 'The room remembers.'" Holmes sank into his chair, his long fingers steepled before his face. "So," he murmured, "the circle closes once more. The unseen hand has reached across the channel to silence even him. Whoever directs this hidden power still walks free." "You mean there is another conspirator?" I asked in astonishment. He smiled faintly. "Perhaps not a conspirator, merely a principle. You recall Vogel's dying phrase, "There are rooms beyond rooms." It may be that every evil has its successor, every mind its reflection. When one room is shut, another opens. That is the world's design. Despite his words, he made no move to reopen the investigation. For days afterward, he sat in deep contemplation, reading the foreign journals and tracing invisible lines upon the map that lay always upon our table. He received no visitors and spoke little, but I knew from long acquaintance that some inner struggle occupied his thoughts. It was nearly a fortnight later that the matter took an unexpected turn. A letter arrived bearing the postmark of Geneva. The handwriting was delicate, feminine. Holmes read it slowly, then passed it to me. "Mr. Holmes, I believe the man you sought, known as Rinaldi, had dealings with a certain society of scholars here in Geneva. They met in a house by the lake, calling themselves Les Amis de la Vérité. Among their papers is a volume signed C. Pemberton. I thought you should know. E. Vernet." "Mrs. Amelia Vernet," Holmes observed. "Our fellow traveller from the Dover train. The circle, you see, tightens even now. It may be that the room without an owner had its birth not in London, but in Geneva." He rose with sudden animation. "Watson, we must travel. The threads of this web stretch farther than we thought, and I would trace them to their very source." Within 2 days we were in Switzerland. The little house by the lake was easily found, a secluded villa surrounded by poplars, its shutters closed and its garden overgrown. The caretaker, an aged peasant, trembled as he admitted us. "It was the house of the scholars, monsieur," he said. "But they are gone now, all gone. They met at night, they talked in whispers, and one morning they vanished. Only this remained." He led us to a room filled with dust and silence. Upon a long table lay a single book, bound in black leather. Holmes opened it carefully. The title, stamped in faded gold, read, "Les chambres sans maître," the rooms without masters. Inside, the pages were covered in intricate handwriting, part cipher, part philosophical speculation. The work appeared to be a treatise upon the uses of secrecy in the pursuit of power, how knowledge might be controlled by a few minds to rule the many. Several passages were signed in Latinized initials, CP, AR, HV, and FG. Holmes turned page after page, his brow furrowing. "Good heavens, Watson," he said softly. "This is no mere record of a conspiracy. It is a doctrine. The room was their symbol, the meeting place of minds that believe truth should belong only to the elect. Pemberton, Gruner, Vogel, all were disciples of this creed. Each acted independently, yet according to the same dark philosophy." He closed the book and gazed out toward the mist-shrouded lake. "You see now, my dear Watson, why I say the room will never be empty. There will always be men who imagine themselves the masters of knowledge, who build their invisible chambers of secrecy and deceit. Our task, yours and mine, is only to open the windows and let the light in." We left the villa as evening fell. The lake lay calm and silver under the moon, and behind us the house stood silent, its blank windows reflecting the fading glow of the west. Holmes paused once upon the path and looked back. "Burn it?" I asked softly. He shook his head. "No, let it stand. It is harmless now. Besides," he added with a strange smile, "it is good for the world to have its reminders. A locked room teaches vigilance." We returned to London a week later. The foreign newspapers spoke of arrests in Geneva of secret documents seized, of agents scattered like leaves before the wind. Yet for Holmes, the matter seemed already past. The book lay in his drawer, unread. On the evening of our return, he took up his violin and played for a long while, low, thoughtful melodies that drifted about the room like smoke. When at last he laid the instrument aside, he said quietly, "The door is closed, Watson. Not forever, but for now. The room without an owner sleeps again, waiting for some other hand in some other age to turn the key. When that day comes, if I am still here, I shall be ready." And so ended, for that time, one of the most curious and perilous of our adventures. Whether the spectre of that mysterious house will rise again, I cannot say, but I know this. Whenever I pass along Baker Street at night and see the familiar glow in the window of 221B, I feel that somewhere, beyond the gaslights and the London fog, the rooms of darkness still exist, and that Sherlock Holmes, sentinel of reason, keeps watch lest they ever again find an owner.